If you think you know the Wild West, think again, because tonight's tale will shake everything you thought you knew about justice, danger, and the courage of a lone cowboy riding against the odds. Before we dive into this unbelievable true frontier story, make sure you hit that subscribe button, share this video with anyone who loves Western legends, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Your support helps keep these forgotten stories alive. Now saddle up, tighten your reins, and let's get started with a tale that stunned the entire frontier. The desert evening settled like a heavy cloak over the land, casting long shadows across the cracked earth as the sun bled red behind the distant ridges. Jedediah Boone rode in silence, his hat pulled low and his jaw set with the steady grit of a man who trusted the trail more than people. The air hung still, too still, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural even for the open West. Whiskey Jack, normally calm, shifted beneath him with nervous steps, ears twitching at sounds Jade couldn't hear yet, but sensed were coming. Jade reined in his horse beside a cluster of sharp-edged boulders that jutted from the ground like the ribs of some ancient beast. A strange tension prickled along his spine, the instinct honed from years drifting through territories where danger was as common as sand. Then he heard it, a soft, fragile sob that didn't belong in such a desolate place. It was faint, swallowed by the wind, but unmistakably human. Jade slid from the saddle, boots landing quietly, hand hovering near the pistol on his hip as he approached the sound. Behind a battered patch of ocotillo bushes crouched a young Apache woman, wrapped tightly in a worn buckskin blanket. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, her breath unsteady, and her eyes wide with fear that cut deeper than any knife. She did not rise or flee at Jade's presence, but instead stared as if she expected him to deliver the final blow in a long string of miseries. Jade paused, unwilling to frighten her more, but unwilling to leave her to the wolves of the night. "Please," she whispered, the word trembling like a candle flame in the wind. For a moment, Jade simply stood there, taking in the fragility of her voice and the silent desperation in her eyes. It had been years since he had allowed himself to be pulled into someone else's troubles, but something in her tone struck at the part of him he thought had gone cold. After a long breath, he crouched down, keeping his movements slow, showing he meant no harm. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and even. She swallowed hard before speaking again, each word sounding as though it cost her strength she barely had left. "My name is Nature," she said. "Soldiers came this morning. They said our band stole horses. They lied. My husband tried to speak, tried to calm them. They shot him." Her breath hitched, forcing her to pause. "My little boy ran toward the riverbed. I searched, but I cannot find him. I cannot lose him too." Jade felt something twist inside his chest. He had seen the aftermath of these so-called investigations, the reckless violence that came when soldiers, fearful, angry, or simply ignorant, met tribes they did not understand. He had witnessed enough tragedies to know Nature's story was no exaggeration. He asked her where the boy had last been seen, and she pointed toward a ravine carved through the dry earth a short ride away. The light was fading fast. A child alone in the desert at night did not stand much chance against predators or search parties. Without another word, Jade extended his hand to help her stand, though she rose unsteadily, legs trembling beneath her. Whiskey Jack snorted softly, sensing the tension and the urgency thickening the air. Jade steadied the woman and lifted her onto the horse, climbing up behind her. "Hold on," he said quietly, tapping his heel into Whiskey Jack's flank as the horse surged forward. The ravine lay like a dark scar across the land, a place where echoes twisted and sounds vanished in strange, unsettling ways. As they approached the edge of the ravine, Jade slowed the horse and scanned the terrain with sharp, practiced eyes. The shadows stretched long and distorted below, making it difficult to pick out shapes. Nature clung to the saddle horn, whispering her son's name into the wind. Jade dismounted and helped her down before lighting a small lantern from his saddlebag. The flame flickered, throwing trembling light into the chasm as they descended cautiously, sand sliding beneath their boots with each step. They reached the basin of the ravine, where the air felt oddly cooler and heavier. Jade raised the lantern high, casting light over the rocks and dried brush. Then a faint movement caught his attention near a fallen mesquite branch. He motioned for Nature to stay back as he approached slowly, senses sharpened, every nerve ready for danger. When he reached the shadowed shape, he knelt and exhaled with relief. A small footprint, fresh, pressed into the dust. He called Nature over, and she fell to her knees, touching the print with trembling fingers. But before hope could settle, another sound echoed from deeper in the ravine, a distant clang of metal against stone, then a low murmur of voices. Jade froze. These weren't the sounds of a lost child but of armed men. He extinguished the lantern instantly, plunging them into darkness. Pressing his finger to his lips, he guided nature toward a narrow ledge where they could conceal themselves. The voices grew clearer, drifting on the air like unwelcome ghosts. Jade recognized the tone: soldiers, restless and irritated, likely the same ones who had torn apart Neche's camp. Jade listened carefully, catching fragments of their conversation. They mentioned finding tracks, a small figure running, and orders not to return to camp until they located the child. The commander's name surfaced: Lieutenant Grayson, one Jade had heard of before, a man known more for ambition than mercy, more for cruelty than justice. If Grayson wanted the boy found, it wasn't to return him safely. Jade's pulse hardened. They had to move, and fast. He motioned to Neche and began leading her silently along the rock wall, searching for a path that would keep them hidden from the patrol. As they edged along the ravine, Jade felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like iron. He had stumbled into a tragedy that was no longer just a chance encounter. A widow seeking help, a child hunted in the dead of night, soldiers covering their sins with violence. This was the kind of trouble Jade had avoided for years. Yet now, walking in darkness with nature close behind, he understood he could no more turn away than abandon his own shadow. Somewhere ahead, her boy was alone, terrified, and running out of time. Jade knew the search had only just begun. The night deepened as Jade and Neche crept along the ragged edge of the ravine. Every footstep placed with care. The soldiers' voices faded behind them, swallowed by the curving stone walls, but Jade knew they would circle back soon. He also knew the boy couldn't have gone far. Children didn't move with the calculation of fugitives. They followed instinct, fear, or the simplest path they saw. He paused, scanning the canyon floor as moonlight washed over the rocks in a thin silver glaze. Somewhere in that pale glow, a child still breathed. Neche touched Jade's arm and pointed toward a split in the rock wall, a narrow passage that wound like a serpent into an even darker part of the ravine. "My husband used to bring fish from there," she whispered. "When storms came, water flowed through it. My son may know to hide in that place." Jade nodded. It made sense. A boy familiar with the land would retreat to a place he had once seen as safe. But if the soldiers found the same trail, the passage could turn into a trap. Still, they had no choice. Jade signaled her to keep close and ducked into the rocky gap. Inside, the air grew cooler, tinged with the faint scent of damp earth. Their footsteps echoed in soft, uneven whispers against the stone. Jade struck a match briefly to study the ground. Small footprints, fresh, hurried, pressed into the dust. The boy had been here. Neche covered her mouth, her eyes shining with fragile hope. They followed the trail deeper until the narrow passage opened into a spacious hollow carved over centuries by vanished floods. Moonlight filtered in through a jagged opening above, illuminating piles of stone and old tree roots tangled like skeletal hands. Jade raised a hand for Neche to stop. A rustle broke the silence from behind a cluster of boulders. Jade stepped forward slowly, body tensed, ready for anything. When he rounded the rocks, he exhaled in relief. Curled up beneath a fallen log, shivering violently but alive, was a small boy no older than 6. His hair was matted with dirt, his cheeks streaked with dried tears. The second he saw Jade, he scrambled backward in fear. But Neche rushed forward, calling his name, and his eyes widened with recognition before he threw himself into her arms. She held him close, rocking him gently, whispering in Apache words that carried a mother's warmth even into the cold cavern. Jade allowed them the moment but didn't let his guard drop. Soldiers weren't the type to abandon a trail easily, especially not under an officer like Grayson. And if they discovered Jade helping the child, they'd shoot first and ask questions never. Jade crouched near the cave wall and listened. At first, only silence filled the hollow. But then faint voices drifted through the passage they had entered from, closer this time, sharper, more determined. "They're tracking us," Jade said quietly. Neche clutched her son tighter, fear returning to her face. Jade scanned the cave for another exit, spotting a narrow chimney-like opening on the far side. It sloped upward, its top disappearing into darkness. It would be a difficult climb, especially with a child, but it was their only chance. "We need to go now," he murmured. He lifted the boy into his arms, stunned by how light he felt, like bones wrapped in skin. Neche followed closely as Jade guided them toward the steep incline. The climb was slow and dangerous. Rocks crumbled beneath their hands, dust fell into their eyes, but the fear of the soldiers growing nearer pushed them upward. Jade went first, securing footholds, pulling Neche up, then hoisting the boy when the ledges grew too high. Several times they slipped, sending small avalanches of stones clattering downward. Jade paused after one such slip, listening as the noise echoed. Soon after, angry shouts rose below. The soldiers had heard, and they were moving fast. Jade gritted his teeth and kept climbing until a pale streak of night sky appeared above them through the opening. He pushed himself out first, then helped Neche and the boy. They emerged onto a high ridge overlooking the ravine, the world below wrapped in darkness, except for the faint lantern glow of the soldiers searching. Jade hurried them toward a cluster of tall pines that offered cover. From there, he scouted their surroundings. They were miles from any settlement, yet soldiers would reach the ridge in minutes. Staying meant death, running blindly meant the same. Then Jade remembered an old trail, abandoned, barely used, leading toward a box canyon not far from where they stood. It wasn't a path soldiers typically knew, because it wasn't on most maps. Jade had ridden it years ago, back when he was running from a past he refused to name. If they could reach it, they might lose their pursuers entirely. He took Neche's hand and led her down the slope, moving quickly but carefully. The journey toward the hidden trail was grueling. The terrain was uneven, scattered with loose stones that threatened to twist ankles or break bones. The boy whimpered softly, exhausted, but Neche whispered steady encouragements, never letting go of him. Jade pressed ahead, eyes shifting constantly between the ground and the ridge behind them. Lantern lights appeared briefly through the trees, a reminder that the soldiers were closing in. Jade picked up the pace, pushing himself harder than he had in years. When they finally reached the mouth of the old trail, Jade felt a surge of relief. The path disappeared into thick brush, nearly invisible unless one knew where to look. He pushed branches aside and ushered them through. Once inside the narrow canyon, the world quieted. Even the wind seemed to hush. The soldiers' voices faded, swallowed by the twisting walls and dense foliage. For the first time all night, Jade allowed himself to breathe deeply. They walked for another half hour until the trail widened into a small clearing sheltered by the canyon walls. Here Jade knew the soldiers couldn't track them. The land was too jagged, too confusing for unfamiliar riders. Neche sat with her son beneath an overhang, tears finally falling freely. Jade crouched nearby, tired but alert. The boy looked at Jade with wide, curious eyes, no longer afraid. Slowly, he reached out his tiny hand. Jade took it gently, feeling something inside him soften, something he thought had died long ago. Before dawn touched the sky, Jade led them toward a safe Apache settlement farther east, one untouched by the soldiers' cruelty. Elders there took Neche and her son in with quiet respect. Janava they called the boy, meaning new life. Jade prepared to ride off, ready to resume the lonely trail, but Neche stopped him. "You saved us," she said softly. "You saved my child." Jade tipped his hat, unsure how to receive gratitude he never asked for. "Just did what was right," he replied. As he rode away, the rising sun painted the canyon gold behind him. The Wild West would never speak his name in legend, never carve his story into stone. But somewhere in the heart of the Apache people, a quiet tale lived on, of a lone cowboy who stepped out of the shadows long enough to save a widow and her child, defying the cruelty of men armed with rifles and lies. And though Jade rode alone again, something inside him had changed. A small act of courage had bridged a world divided by fear. And for the first time in years, the trail ahead no longer felt quite so empty.